Welcome to Snail Trail 4x4. Today we're going to show you guys how to put a beadlock into a tire, or a tire onto a beadlock, whichever way you want to look at it. So when you get your beadlocks from wherever you get them from, these happen to be Racelines. When you get them, they're going to come in different parts, right? So you're going to have your actual rim here, this guy here. You're going to have your beadlock ring, and it's going to come with all the bolts as well. Now, we actually took this one apart, so we're going to put it back together. But all your bolts, your hardware for your beadlocks, you want them to make sure that they are grade 8 bolts. And then whatever hardware the manufacturer suggests, whatever thread, pitch, length bolts, everything like that. Another thing you may or may not get with your beadlocks that you might want, you might not want, it's completely up to you, are spacers as well. And what spacers do is you will notice that here on our ring there's a lip right here, and this is where our bead is going to sit, and then our ring here clamps it all down, clamps the bead to the rim, so you're not going to lose your bead. What happens every once in a while, your bead on your tire is going to be so thick that it'll allow extra space for here, and as you start torquing down all these bolts, you will actually bend your beadlock ring in, and it creates an uneven pressure on all of the bolts in your hardware and your beadlock ring. So in order to avoid that uneven pressure, which causes your bolts to break and then kind of zipper open, you need spacers. So check out your tires, see your fitment on your beadlock rings, and see if you need spacers. Talk to your manufacturer about them. First step here is we need to put our rim into our tire. Check your tires as well. These IROCs here that we got are directional. Not all tires are directional. A lot of them are universal, so you can run them on either side of the vehicle. But IROCs are directional. So make sure that you're setting it up so that you have 2 tires going one direction and 2 tires going the other direction, so that you can have them on either side of the vehicle. There's little arrows on the side of the tire that'll tell you which way that tire is supposed to roll. Take your favorite grease. Now you can use grease. Dawn dish soap works awesome for this. Simple Green in water works really good for this. Just get in a spray bottle, and what you want to do is lather up the tire. Nice and lathered here. The more grease you have, the better your chances will be of getting this on the first time. Put it down face first, because our goal is we want this beadlock area inside the tire, and we want the rear bead, which is going to be this side, up on the bead of the rim. So we're just going to put it down like that, get it nice and centered. There we go. There you go. And your beadlock ring is now set. So now the next step is to put that hardware in the ring onto your rim and clamp that tire down to your rim. And this is where this tire comes in handy. So our next step here is we're going to install our beadlock ring and our hardware down to our rim, which is going to clamp our tire to the rim and give you a beadlock. This part of the job is what takes the longest, so have patience here, get comfortable is the big tip I have for everybody. I like to do these by setting up my tire on a second tire. We have one underneath here, so it's kind of elevated a little bit. And then pick a good rolling stool. So you can use a rolling stool like this guy here, or an office chair, something that rolls, because we're going to end up going around this tire a lot. Probably about 10 to 15 times as we go through this. So the tools you're going to need are a socket and a wrench to match the hardware that you have for your beadlocks. For our Racelines here, we have a 1/2-inch hex heads. So I have a 1/2-inch sockets here and here. Disclaimer for this, I like to save time and use an impact driver to get these started. I don't recommend it unless you're very, very good at using impact drivers and knowing when you're going too far with them. Very, very gentle if you're going to use these. If you're not confident in using an impact driver to do these, don't use it. Use your good old socket wrench. It'll take a little bit longer, but it's going to get the job done, and it's going to be very accurate for you. So you're going to need those two. tools, maybe this one depending on your confidence levels, and a torque wrench that can go up to whatever your manufacturer's spec is on your beadlocks. Ours is going to be 25. What we're going to do is, the whole goal of beadlock rings is to set up your hardware equally and evenly. We want the pressure around the ring to clamp down as we go, as even as possible. If we just torque down this whole side here, it's going to bend your ring out of shape. And that's not what we want to do. We want to avoid that at all costs. So what I like to do is separate our beadlock ring into 8 sections, and then you'll see how we go about attacking and tackling those sections. So what I like to do first is I have my 4 starting bolts, and I mark them with a red X, and that keeps me knowing which ones are my starting sections. I put them all equidistant from each other. So at 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 9 o'clock. So I can picture this like a big old clock face. For our next 4 bolts, because we're going to section into 8 sections, I put dots on them. So we have red X's and red dots, and those are going to go equidistant from our first 4. Perfect. So now we have 8 bolts in, all equidistant from each other, and these are going to be the sections on how we're going to attack this ring to push it all down evenly. Now that we have these 8 bolts in and kind of lined up, we want to get them started by hand. So make sure that the threads are engaging. If you have a really thick tire, you may need to push it down a little bit and get the threads to start engaging for you. But once these guys are engaged, again, I'm going to use an impact. Do not use it if you're not ready to use it. And we're just going to go nice and easy. And you can hear that as soon as it starts clicking, and I was barely pulling that, that's when you want to stop. Now we got our number 1 bolt done here. My 6, your 12 o'clock. Now we're going to go to the opposite side of the wheel and do that one. Nice and easy. There we go. And now we're going to come over to our 3 o'clock. There we go. And then straight across from that one to that guy. There we go. Now from here, we're going to start on our dot bolts, our second set of 4, right? So we're going to come over here. There. And then across the rim, always go across as far as you can. And you're just going to kind of do this crisscross star pattern. Once we have our first 8 bolts down, the ring is in place. It's not going to move on you. Now we can start putting in these guys into all of our holes. There we go. So we have all of our bolts lined up. Now we're going to start at our first 4, right? These are our first 4 X's. We're going to go 3 over. Now we got these 3 done. We're going to go across to these 3. Whoops. We got those 3 done. Now we're going to come across to these 3. Then we're going to come back over to here to these 3. And then we're going to come across to these 3. And then across to these 3. And then we're going to come across to these 3. And then lastly to these 3. And that is all that I use the impact driver for. I may now just go around real quick, make sure that everything is about to that torque where the impact driver will start ratcheting on you. And the thing that makes this take so long and why you have to go around so many times is if we tighten down this one and this one on either side, it's going to bring the ring down even further, which is going to loosen the torque on this one. So that means every time you get one of these down to a torque further than what it was at, you're going to loosen up the one next to it. Now that we have all of our bolts kind of in place. The whole point of using the impact driver is not to tighten them down. It's mainly to get them in place. Remember that. I also, before we go any further, I wanted to make sure to reiterate, make sure you're not cross-threading these bolts. When you get them in, if you start cross-threading them, you're gonna have a really bad day and you're gonna ruin your rim, and you have to get a new beadlock rim, which is a good $400 to $500 depending which one you have. So make sure you're not cross-threading them. That's the whole point of getting them in hand first, to make sure the threads are all lined up and good to go. The second thing you really want to make sure of before you get to this point is to make sure the tire is centered on your rim. Most beadlocks nowadays from manufacturers like Raceline, they're going to have a nice little groove that we showed you at the beginning shot there in the rim that kind of your tire sits in. Now, if you don't have one of those grooves, it's going to be a lot more difficult to make sure that your tire is centered on your rim, so make sure you do that before getting to this point here. The next step here really is the time-consuming part of torquing everything down evenly so you're not putting uneven stresses on your ring and warping your ring. This is what takes a long time, so I'll explain a little bit of what we're doing here first, and then you guys just sit back and enjoy the music and watch the show. So what we want to do is grab our torque wrench, and we're not going to go straight to 25. The whole goal is to put it on evenly and slowly so we're not warping the ring. If we go straight to 25, we're going to warp the ring here before we get around to this side. I have it set now at about 14 foot-pounds, and this is where the benefit of marking your bolts comes in play. Now that we have all of our bolts in here, I can see where my starting points are, see where my sections of the ring are that we were doing when we were putting all the bolts in. So I'm going to start at a section here, my number 1 bolt, and I'm just going to go until it clicks at me, and that'll be about 12 to 14 right there. And now we want to take that, go across. So we're still following right now the same pattern that we were following when we were doing the impact driver and putting the bolts into this point. There we go. Now we're going to come over. There we go. So now we've done our first 4 bolts, right? Now we have our next 4, the dots, and we know where those are located on the ring. So as you can see, even just doing those 4, a lot of these have already loosened up. They're not even in here anymore. You can see how much of an impact just getting 4 bolts down. Now to fill in these, as you can see, a lot of them are hand loose. Again, we're just gonna go through and get these back nice and snug, and then we can go through and tighten them down to the 14 foot-pounds with the torque wrench. There we go. So now they're all in place, and now we're gonna go around, and now that our first 8 are kind of down at 14, now we still want to make sure, because we're not down enough, I can see the ring here in parts where it kind of does a little bit of wobbling. So what we're going to do is continue to hop across in our sections of 8 here that we have. So we'll start doing that. So right now, all of our hardware is about at 14 foot-pounds. I believe what we're gonna do is we're gonna go all the way around the rim once, just to make sure it is, and that we didn't miss one of our sections of 8 here. Once everything is down at 14, then we'll go the rest of the way to 25. Oh, I found one loose. So you know what that means? Since this one is loose here, I get to start here and go all the way around the circle until everything's tight. Oh, found another loose one. So now I get to start here as my starting point. Go all around the circle to make sure everything's down at 14 foot-pounds. I remember what we said earlier. As you tighten stuff down, it's going to loosen up other things because the ring settles into place. And that's why when we find a loose one, we have to go around all the way around again in order to make sure everything is where we need it to be before we continue. Bam! We made it all the way around the circle at 14 foot-pounds. Now we're going to crank it up to 25, which is our manufacturer recommended spec for these bolts. And we're going to start with our back at our sections of 8 rather than going around the circle. Because again, we want to make sure that we're tightening down evenly and not tightening down this whole side, which then actually folds up your ring as we get closer and closer to the untightened area. And you can really do some damage to your ring. So I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here by saying that over and over again, but that is the whole point of doing beadlocks this way. So make sure we're doing it evenly. Sit back and enjoy the music. All right, so we did the whole ring at 25 foot-pounds in our sections. Now we're going to go around the ring circular, doing every single bolt until we know that everything is at 25 foot-pounds of torque. We'll continue an extra time around just to make sure that they are at the final torque that we want them all at. Enjoy the music. There we have it. We had one full go around at 25 foot-pounds. Now just to finish this guy out, I'm going to go around one more time just for extra good measure, and then we'll close this guy out so you guys can go and try it yourselves. Woo! Come on! Now the last step for everything is, remember, now that we have that front bead on, we got to put on the rear bead. And that's pretty easy and not very time consuming compared to what we just did. This is the important part. This is where you want to spend your time and make sure you're doing it right. But we're still going to show you guys how to put on rear bead before we close this guy out. Last step before we put these guys back on the vehicle, and this is the easiest way to do this if you're in a shop scenario. We may end up shooting some other videos to show you guys how to reseat beads on the trail. This is the easiest way we found to do it in the shop. The first way is you need your rim to be able to be pushed down. So if you can do that without having anything under the tire, just it sitting on the shop floor, perfect, you guys are good. We can't do that with these iRocks. It's a 9.5-inch rim with a bead lock, so it ends up sitting pretty much on the ground. We can't really push it down very much. So we just put some 4x4 steel tubing underneath the tire part of it so that the rim can be pushed down, and that's going to help create our seal to reseat the bead here. Reseating beads does not take as much air pressure as you might think it does. A lot of people say it does. You don't need to blast air pressure in. It certainly helps to have more of an air pressure. So if you have a power tank, lighter fluid, I've seen firecrackers and M80s work really well to do it as well. But really, you don't need that stuff. What you need is a good seal of the tire on your rim. So all I'm gonna do is just kind of turn on the compressor here from the rig. I'm just running a twin ARB and a Morphlate, and we're only using one of the hoses of the Morphlate. I'm just gonna listen here and see where the air is leaking out around the tire, between the tire and the rim, and I'm gonna pull the rim over to that side of wherever it's leaking from the tire. Should work out pretty well. I've done this a lot of times in the past with these. So what we're gonna do, I'm gonna stop talking, we're gonna turn on the air compressor, it's gonna get loud, and we're gonna reseat the beads, and we'll show you guys how it looks as it's coming up. Instead of popping it with that huge burst of air, it's going to come up nice and gradual, and you'll be able to see the point at which it goes seated on the bead. Here we go. So our leak was over here, so I put air pressure over here, and now it's airing up. Once the tire starts moving and you can see it start climbing up the rim, you can let it go. You have a seal, you have air pressure in there, it's gonna hold it on. Now it's just a matter of getting that bead up and over. You can see it coming up right here. There it goes. I think we're all on. There you guys have it. Hope you guys enjoyed how to put your favorite beadlock onto your favorite tire. grab your favorite torque wrench, grab your favorite rolling seat, sit back, relax. Plan on this taking about 45 minutes in order to do one wheel. So, hope you enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed it and had a good time, make sure to hammer down that subscribe button below. Check out all the other videos here on Snail Trail 4x4, and don't forget, everybody, keep crawling.